Hello, folks. Good evening. Blitzball champ Jason Ingram is back once again here on the U to the Tube for another Carolina Panthers talk video. I couldn't resist doing this. I know I had talked about this earlier, but I had to get back on here and talk about this because it's already got me thinking quite a bit, and I really can't wait to hear all the feedback and get everybody else's thoughts on this. But here we go. The great Carolina Panther tight end debate. Who is the better tight end between Wesley Walls and Greg Olsen? This is tough. This is really tough. Really tough. This was really tough. So, both had great careers, especially in Carolina. But when it comes down to comparing the two, who is the better tight end? That is the question. And honestly, it is a really tough one. It's a really tough one. Let's break some things down. Here's the crazy thing. Both players have played for 14 seasons in the NFL. That's crazy. I honestly thought Wesley Walls played a little bit longer, but no. Both have played 14 seasons in the NFL. As hard as that may be to believe. But let's go through some comparisons. Now, of course, both Wesley Walls and Greg Olsen were drafted in the NFL draft. Wesley Walls was drafted in 1989, round 2, pick 56, by the San Francisco 49ers. Whereas in the Chicago Bears drafted Greg Olsen in 2007, round 1, pick 31. Both are very similar in stature. Wesley Walls, 6'5", about 240 pounds. Greg Olsen, 6'5", about 255. Of course, Wesley Walls played in Ole Miss. Greg Olsen played in University of Miami, Florida. Now, Greg Olsen played on 3 total teams in his career: Chicago Bears, Carolina Panthers, Seattle Seahawks. Wesley Walls played on 4 teams: San Francisco 49ers, New Orleans Saints, Carolina Panthers, Green Bay Packers. Career highlights. Now this is going to be very interesting. Career highlights. Starting with Wesley Walls. He is a Super Bowl champion, which he did win with the 49ers. Now, it was the 49ers against the Broncos. They won by a score of 55-10, but he only had 1 catch for 9 yards in that game. So, can't really say that Wesley Walls did a whole lot in that game. He only had 1 catch. But, I mean, it's not like he really had to do a lot. I mean, the 49ers won 55-10. So, I mean, that kind of speaks for itself. But he does have a Super Bowl championship, and that was Super Bowl 24. Super Bowl 24. Of course, Greg Olsen doesn't have a Super Bowl. He's been to one, but he doesn't have one. Wesley Walls is a first team All Pro, which he got in 2001. Greg Olsen has never been first team All Pro. Wesley Walls is a 3-time second team All Pro, which he accomplished in 1996, 97, and 99. Greg Olsen is a 2-time second team All Pro, which he accomplished in 2015 and 2016. Wesley Walls is a 5-time Pro Bowler, which he did in from 1996 to 99 and 2001, which was all with the Carolina Panthers. Greg Olsen is a 3-time Pro Bowler, which he did 2014 to 2016, all with the Carolina Panthers. And Greg Olsen was on the PFWA All Rookie team in 2007. Something that Wesley Walls doesn't have. And of course, Wesley Walls was inducted into the Carolina Panthers Hall of Honor. Now, I heard that. Now, when it comes to accomplishments, I mean, Wesley Walls does have the advantage, being that he's a Super Bowl champion, first team All Pro. He's had, 2 more Pro Bowls than Greg Olsen, and had 1 more second team All Pro than Greg Olsen. So Wesley Walls does have the advantage in accomplishments. Now let's look at stats. This is where it gets really interesting. Let me see. See if I can go to. Here we go. So Greg Olsen, or not, actually, let's start with Wesley Walls. Wesley Walls has played in 196 games in his NFL career. 196. And has recorded 450 receptions and 5,291 receiving yards and 54 receiving touchdowns. That's Wesley Walls. 196 games, 450 catches, 5,291 yards, 54 receiving touchdowns. That's Wesley Walls. Still really good. Really great stats. Greg Olsen has played in 199 games in his NFL career. 199. He has 742 receptions for 8,683 yards and 60 receiving touchdowns. So definitely Greg Olsen has the advantage in stats. And we have to also remember, both tight ends played 14 seasons in the NFL. Now, One of the things to realize is one of the things that Greg Olsen has done as a tight end was 3 back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons, which was 2014, 2015, 2016, all with the Carolina Panthers. Wesley Walls has actually never had an 1,000-yard receiving season. The closest that he's come was 822 yards receiving in his 4th year with Carolina. But he has never gotten 1,000 yards receiving. And Greg Olsen has done it 3 times in a row. So that's something else to think about. And like I said, his postseason play was mainly with San Francisco, but he was a second string. Despite them winning a Super Bowl, didn't really see a whole lot of playing time in that Super Bowl run with the San Francisco 49ers. Now, Greg Olsen has had 7 fumbles. Wesley Walls, 2 fumbles. Wesley Walls has gotten 12 touchdowns in a season, career high 12 touchdowns in a season. Greg Olsen, his highest in a season was 8 touchdowns. So Wesley Walls has that, in a season's got 12 touchdowns. Greg Olsen, 8 in a season. And even in his 3rd year of getting 1,000 yards receiving, Greg Olsen only had 3 receiving touchdowns. So and also, let's also keep in mind, the postseason, Greg Olsen had 41 catches, 629 yards receiving, and 3 touchdowns. So Greg Olsen has kind of had the advantage there, being that, Greg Olsen was starting tight end. So, I mean, I don't know, y'all. And then we have to also think it's kind of 2 different eras. 2 different eras. Wesley Walls came into the league 1989, and his last season was 2003. Greg Olsen came into the league 2007, and his last season was 2020. So 2 different eras. Not to mention, I mean, we gotta look at a lot of who they played with as well. I mean, I know that throughout his time in Carolina, Wesley Walls, I know mostly had Steve Berline, Kerry Collins, and whatnot. But who is the better tight end? That's tough. I mean, You would think on paper, Greg Olsen would technically be the better tight end, but we have to look at it both tight ends in their prime. Both tight ends in their prime. I think with Wesley Walls, is the more complete tight end in a sense of blocking and catching consistency. I would say that's what sets him apart. Not saying that Greg Olsen isn't consistent with blocking, but you have to think, being that Greg Olsen has hit 1,000 yards receiving three different times on the same team, he's very much well known for his consistency with his hands, because Greg Olsen has phenomenal hands. Wesley Walls does as well, but I would say a couple of things. I would say that definitely Greg Olsen was more of a deep threat. I think, as a matter of fact, looking at Wesley Walls, his longest catch was 54 yards with Carolina. For Greg Olsen, it was 78 yards with Carolina. But see, Greg Olsen has had a lot of big catches. I mean, of at least 40 yards or more throughout his career. I know a big chunk of them was with Carolina, but he's had a couple with Chicago as well. Because the thing with Chicago, Greg Olsen was all right, but he didn't blow up. He didn't blow up until he got to Carolina. But he posted his career high 8 touchdowns in a season with Chicago. So, something to keep in mind there. Wesley Walls started to blow up when he got to New Orleans. That's really when he started to blow up, which was 1994. Because he would have played longer, but there were 2 seasons where Wesley Walls didn't play due to injury. Otherwise, he would have played about 16 seasons. But Wesley Walls started to blow up, especially stat-wise, in 94 with the Saints. Of course, he only played with the Saints 2 years before started his career in Carolina. Now, of course, the biggest bulk of his career was with Carolina, just like with Greg Olsen. So it is a fair comparison. But I think when it comes down to it, accomplishments, like overall accomplishments, I think Wesley Walls barely beats out Greg Olsen. I think statistic wise, you got to give the edge to Greg Olsen. As far as a complete tight end, Wesley Walls, I think, gets it. But like I said, Greg Olsen is not far at all from being a complete tight end. I think, if anything, Greg Olsen was a little faster. Greg Olsen was a little more of a deep threat. When it came to turnovers, Wesley Walls, took care of the ball a little bit better than Greg Olsen. But I don't know. What do y'all think? What do y'all honestly think? Who is the better tight end? Because, I mean, you can't really put the fact that Wesley Walls has a Super Bowl over Greg Olsen. He only had one catch for 9 yards in that Super Bowl victory with the 49ers. So that's the only thing with that. You can't really hold that against Greg Olsen. You know what I mean? But on paper, he does have more accomplishments. I just really wonder, in their prime, how they would really compare in their prime. And not to mention the fact that Wesley Walls consistently made the Pro Bowl. I mean, he made it 5 years. 4 of them in a row. 4 of them were in a row. So I don't know, y'all. It's tough. It's really tough. But I feel like if we're talking about purely stats, you got to give the edge to Greg Olsen. But I think accomplishments and overall, like, complete tight end, I think you got to give it to Wesley Walls. But as far as who's the better out of the two, one could argue and say that they're pretty even across the board, like overall. But it's really it's tough. It's really, really tough. Because I love both. I love both. But I have to say, it's really, really hard to pick one over the other. I mean, if it came down to building the perfect legendary all-time Panthers roster, you would have to have both Greg Olsen and Wesley Walls as your 1-2 tight end combination. But I would love to get y'all's thoughts on this battle. Wesley Walls or Greg Olsen? Who do you believe is the better tight end, especially in their prime? But I think the thing that really makes it difficult, and I think Paul Mancini, shout out to him, made it clear in the previous live stream I did. I mean, Greg Olsen played in a pass heavy era currently. Wesley Walls, I mean, despite him having one season where he had 12 receiving touchdowns, he wasn't really in a pass heavy era, especially in his earlier years. But like I said, his numbers started to rise once he got to New Orleans and then, got settled in Carolina. So it's tough. It's really, really tough. Because these two played in 2 different eras, yet both played 14 seasons. Both were drafted tight ends. Both were Well, Wesley Walls was a round 2 draft pick. Greg Olsen was a round 1 draft pick, which, I mean, that's not too much of an impacting difference. Greg Olsen only played 3 more career games than Wesley Walls. But one thing that does stand out, the fact that Greg Olsen had at least 3,000 more receiving yards than Wesley Walls, but yet Greg Olsen only had gotten 60 receiving touchdowns, and with Wesley Walls getting 3,000 less receiving yards, still got 54 receiving touchdowns. Let's see actually how many receiving touchdowns that they had in Carolina. So let me see. So Wesley Walls, let's see, Carolina specifically. So 10, 6, plus 2 plus 5 plus 4. So Wesley Walls had 44 receiving touchdowns with Carolina. So out of the 54 receiving touchdowns he had, 44 of them were with Carolina. Pretty impressive. Greg Olsen. Okay, let's look at Greg Olsen. So Carolina, 5 plus 5 plus 6 plus 6 plus 7 plus 3 plus 1 plus 4 plus 2. 39. Greg Olsen had 39 of his 60 receiving touchdowns with the Carolina Panthers. Regular season. And, if you want to add the postseason, because postseason, if you add 2, that's 40. That's 41 with Carolina. So 41, if you include the 2 postseason touchdowns for Greg Olsen, and 44 with Wesley Walls. Very, very similar. Very similar. Very similar careers, it seems, with the Carolina Panthers when it comes to touchdowns. So, but yeah, I think it's definitely safe to say that both tight ends definitely had their best years with the Carolina Panthers. And that says a lot, especially with this debate. But yeah. That's pretty much all that I have to say. But if I realistically had to choose one out of these 2, if I had to choose one, and we're talking in their prime, if I had to choose one, I would have to go with Greg Olsen. I would have to go with Greg Olsen. But it's not by a long shot. Don't get me wrong. It's not by a long shot. over Wesley Walls. Definitely not by a long shot. It's close. It's close. But I have to go with Greg Olsen. Because when it comes to, playing out there on the field, Greg Olsen can be more of a deep threat than Wesley Walls. And that's the slight advantage that I give Greg Olsen over Wesley Walls. That's the slight advantage. And, maybe speed as well. Speed, a little bit of elusiveness. So, I mean, that's pretty much all that I can say. But if I had to choose between Wesley Walls and Greg Olsen, it would be Greg Olsen, but it's not a landslide. It's definitely not a landslide. So, but yeah. Because both have put up great stats, not only just in their overall careers, but in their careers with Carolina. I mean, there's a reason why Wesley Walls is in the Hall of Honor. There's a reason. But yeah, Carolina was where both of these tight ends really broke out. I mean, not to say that Wesley Walls didn't do a little something in New Orleans, but Carolina was where these two tight ends really broke out and really became stars. And like I said, Greg Olsen, he wasn't terrible in Chicago. No, I would dare say he was terrible in Chicago. Nah, he was decent in Chicago, but he blew up with Carolina. Definitely blew up with Carolina. So, but yeah, I would love to know what y'all's thoughts are between the two tight ends. Who would y'all pick? If you had to pick one, who you think is the better tight end, especially in their prime, who would you go with? And for me, I'd have to go Greg Olsen. But like I said, it's not by a lot. It's not by a lot. Because like I said, if it came down to putting together the all-time Panthers roster, Wesley Walls and Greg Olsen would be my two tight ends. Hands down. Hands down would be my two tight ends. If I had to throw in a third tight end, it would probably be Chris Mangum. It'd probably be Chris Mangum. But the two tight ends, the two top tight ends, definitely Wesley Walls and Greg Olsen, for sure. But if I had to add a third, it'd be Chris Mangum. Definitely Chris Mangum. I mean, Carolina has had some pretty decent tight ends. I mean, behind Wesley Walls and Greg Olsen, I mean, Chris Mangum, Dante Rosario had a little something. Jeremy Shockey. So I mean, there was a couple of tight ends. Ed Dixon was a pretty decent tight end for Carolina, especially playing alongside Greg Olsen. Ed Dixon, he did his thing. He definitely did his thing. I'm hoping Ian Thomas and Tommy Tremble can really set a new trend, a new era for Carolina Panther tight ends. But definitely Wesley Walls, Greg Olsen were the best. Definitely were the best. You know what? Let me pull up Chris Mangum just for a second. I'm kind of curious to look at his stats. Okay, Chris Mangum. Let's see. who was actually a 7th-round pick. 151 receptions, 1,424 yards, 9 touchdowns. I mean, like I said, he was mostly a backup. He was mostly a backup. But he was not a bad backup. He definitely was not a bad backup. So, and of course, he was the backup to who? Wesley Walls. But hey, he's played his whole career with the Carolina Panthers from 97 to 06. So didn't get a chance to play alongside or behind Greg Olsen because, Greg Olsen came into the league in 07. But still, I mean, hey, he did a little something as a backup to Wesley Walls. So can't sleep on that. Can't sleep on that. But that's pretty much all that I have. Like I said, let me know what y'all thought. Who would y'all go with in their prime? Wesley Walls or Greg Olsen? Let me know in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell. And thank you so much for watching. This has been another Carolina Panthers Talk video brought to you by Blitzball Champ Gaming. I'm your host, Blitzball Champ Jason Ingram. Hope everybody has a blessed evening, and I will see you all in the next video. Alrighty, take care. Good night.